Eternity's Victory. The Awakening of the Necrons, Chapter 1. The Awakening in Darkness. In the eternal darkness, beneath the planet Xerath Prime, a world the Imperium of man claimed as its colony, the ancient tombs rested. Xerath Prime was a dusty, wind-scoured desert world, covered in ruins from a forgotten civilization. The Imperium's Astra Militarum had established a base here to extract valuable minerals, unaware of what slumbered beneath the surface. The Necrons, eternal machines from an age when the stars were young, had slept for millennia. Their tomb world, a labyrinth of corridors and chambers filled with lethal technology, was a fortress waiting to be reawakened. Captain Elias Thorne, commander of the 47th Cadian Regiment, stood on an observation platform gazing out over the siege lines. His face was scarred from countless battles, and his uniform fluttered in the hot wind. "Status report," he muttered to his adjutant, Lieutenant Myra Voss. "The enemy is still contained, sir. Our basilisk cannons have bombarded the entrances for 3 days." "No sign of resistance," Voss replied, her voice steady, but carrying an undertone of unease. They had discovered the tombs by chance when a mining expedition broke through a wall and awakened something terrible. Now thousands of guardsmen, supported by Lemon Rust battle tanks and Chimera transports, surrounded the subterranean entrances. The Imperial fleet hung in orbit, ready to bombard the planet if needed. But beneath the earth, the Necrons stirred. At the heart of the tomb world, Cryptek Xerath, master of time manipulation and repair, activated. His metallic body shimmering with Gauss energy whirred to life. Protocol initiated. "Hostile intrusion detected," he whispered in the binary code that echoed across the network. Around him, thousands of Necron warriors awakened, their skeletal frames rising from stasis crypts. Their eyes burned with green light, and their Gauss flares hummed with energy that could strip flesh from atoms. Tension built like a storm gathering strength. Xerath felt the vibrations of the Imperial artillery. Each explosion shook the vaults, but Necron technology absorbed the impact. "We are besieged," he reported to Overlord Karnak, ruler of this tomb. Karnak, an imposing figure crowned with living metal, sat upon his throne in the central chamber. His voice echoed like a grave's whisper. "The living believe they can break us. They do not know that we are eternal." Above ground, the bombardment intensified. Sergeant Luca Grimm, a veteran of Cadia, led a platoon of guardsmen into one of the collapsed entrances. "Forward for the Emperor," he roared, his lasgun at the ready. The air was thick with dust, their flashlights cutting weak beams through the gloom. Step by step they advanced, adrenaline pounding in their veins. Suddenly a low humming rose, like a swarm of insects in a hive. "What the hell is that?" whispered a soldier beside him. From the shadows emerged a Necron warrior, its body reconstructed before their eyes, bones knitting together, metal flowing back into place. Gauss energy crackled, and with a single shot it flayed the skin from the first guardsman. Screams echoed through the corridor. "Fire!" Grimm bellowed, and Lars bolts rained down on the machine. It fell but rose again, its self-repair protocols activating. Tension erupted into chaos. The guardsmen fired wildly, but for every Necron that fell, 2 more awakened. In the tombs below, Xerath gathered his power. He activated the Chronometron, an artifact that bent time. Time slowed for the Imperials, while the Necrons moved with blinding speed. "We must break the siege," Karnak declared. "Summon the legions." Thousands of warriors marched forth, their footsteps echoing like a death sentence. Immortals, elite soldiers armed with heavier weaponry, took up strategic positions. Destroyers hovered into motion, their anti-gravity platforms humming. Captain Thorne felt a chill as reports poured in. "The enemy is awakening, they're coming up." His orders rang through the Vox network. "All units, hold the line." Basilisks fire at maximum capacity. Explosions thundered, the earth trembling. But beneath, the Necrons' Canoptek scarabs, tiny mechanical insects, swarmed tirelessly to repair the damage. They crawled across walls and floors, reconstructing collapsed tunnels. In a side corridor, Lieutenant Voss fought personally. She had led a reconnaissance team deeper into the tomb. "Contact the base, we need reinforcements," she shouted, her pistol cracking shots at a group of warriors. One took a round to the chest, but phased out and reappeared unharmed. Her heart pounded. This was no ordinary foe. They didn't die, they just endured. Tension reached its peak when Karnak activated the monolith, a massive pyramid-shaped war engine that could teleport troops. It rose from the ground, breaking through the surface like a god's manifestation. The Imperial soldiers stared in horror. "By the Emperor, what is that?" an artilleryman screamed. The monolith's particle whip unleashed a beam across the lines, annihilating tanks and guardsmen in a surge of green light. Yet the siege held. Thorn ordered a counterstrike. Deploy the stormtroopers. Take the fight underground. Elite squads with melter guns stormed into the tombs, their breaths heavy behind gas masks. They clashed with Necron Lichguards, guardians wielding hyperphase swords that sliced through armor like paper. Brutal melee erupted. A stormtrooper stabbed with his knife, but the Lichguard's shield absorbed the blow, and the counterstroke decapitated him. In his chamber, Xerath manipulated temporal flows to predict Imperial maneuvers. "They are coming from the north. Prepare an ambush." Necron warriors stood motionless as statues, waiting. When the guardsmen advanced, the traps sprang. Gauss fire rained down, screams filled the air. A wounded guardsman crawled back, blood spilling, his eyes wide with terror. "They're demons, undead demons," Karnak watched from his throne. "This is only the beginning. We shall crush them." His strategy was patience. Let the Imperium waste its resources while the Necrons repaired and multiplied. Yet the tension was fragile. One mistake, one collapsed tunnel, and everything could shift. Above, Thorn gathered his officers. "We must destroy the core, launch the bombers." Valkyrie gunships dived, unleashing inferno bombs upon the entrances. Craters ripped the landscape, but the Necrons' quantum shielding absorbed much of the assault. One bomb struck a scarab swarm, exploding in a chain reaction, but more came to replace them. Deep within, Xerath sensed a disturbance. An Imperial psyker, a sanctioned witch, had infiltrated. Her mind probed the network, seeking to disrupt the repairs. "Intrusion detected," Xerath warned. He unleashed the flayed ones, deranged Necrons draped in the skins of their victims. They crawled through ducts, claws scraping metal. The psyker felt their presence, terror flooding her mind. She unleashed a psychic storm, but the flayed ones were immune. They knew no fear. The slaughter was swift. The psyker's screams echoed through the tomb as she was torn apart. But her death sent a final message to Thorn. "They are weaker within. Press the attack." The Necrons responded by unleashing a doomsday arc, a hovering artillery platform. Rising from a hidden vault, it fired a beam that annihilated an entire battalion. Guardsmen broke, fleeing in panic, their morale shattered. "Stand your ground," Thorn bellowed, but doubt gnawed at his soul. As the sun set over Xerath Prime, the siege remained locked. The Necrons had awakened, but the Imperium still held them contained. The air was thick with tension, like a storm ready to burst. Who would break first? Karnak smiled in the darkness, his plans forged in eternal patience. Chapter 2, the storm breaks beneath the dusty skies of Xerath Prime. The siege raged with unrelenting force. Imperial artillery thundered, basilisk cannons spat shells that slammed into the underground entrances of the Necron tomb with earth-shaking impact. Explosions hurled clouds of sand and stone skyward, and the air was thick with smoke and the stench of burnt powder. Captain Elias Thorn stood in the command center, his eyes narrowing as he studied the flickering holographic maps before him. Reports streamed in through the Voxnet, each message carrying a note of desperation. The Necrons, those undead machines, had awakened, and their first resistance had already cost hundreds of lives. But the Imperium held the line, determined to crush the Xenos' threat before it could spread. "Report, Voss," Thorn barked to his adjutant, Lieutenant Myra Voss, who stood at a Vox unit coordinating with the outer forces. Her face was tight, her hair matted with sweat beneath her helmet. "Sir, we've lost contact with 3 platoons in Sector Delta. Sentinel scouts report movement underground, something big. The basilisks have fired over 1,000 shells, but the damage seems minimal. The enemy, they're just repairing themselves." Thorn swore under his breath. He had seen much in his years in the Astra Militarum, from the brutal hordes of the Orcs to the cunning ambushes of the Eldar, but this was different. The Necrons weren't just an enemy, they were a force of nature, relentless and utterly without fear. Deploy the Valkyries, we need air support, and bring in the Stormtroopers, we hit them hard before they can fully organize. Deep underground, at the heart of the Tomb World, the Necrons had already shifted into Phase 2 of their protocol. Counterattack. Overlord Karnak, seated upon his throne of living metal, oversaw the activation of entire legions. His sensors burned with a cold green glow, and his voice echoed through the vast chambers. The living believe they can bind us. They do not understand we are the masters of time. Cryptek Xerath, what is the status of our defenses? Xerath, his body pulsing with Gauss energy, projected a detailed analysis of the battlefield. Primary exits are under assault, but quantum shielding absorbs 97.4% of incoming fire. Canoptek Scarabs have repaired 82% of the damage. I have engaged time manipulation to accelerate restoration. The legions are prepared, warriors, immortals, and destroyers stand ready. I recommend immediate offensive to shatter their lines. Karnak nodded, his crown of energy crackling. So be it. Unleash the swarm, let them feel our wrath. In the subterranean corridors, Canoptek Scarabs swarmed, their tiny mechanical bodies carving new tunnels to the surface. They moved like a flood of metal, reconstructing collapsed passages and reinforcing defensive nodes. Warriors marched in flawless ranks, Gauss flayers primed and glowing. Immortals, armed with Tesla carbines, took up positions at strategic choke points, while destroyers glided forward on anti-grav platforms, humming like angry insects. Above ground, Sergeant Luca Grimm, commanding a reinforced platoon in Sector Gamma, felt the earth tremble beneath his boots. His cybernetic arm clicked as he tightened his grip on his lasgun. Eyes sharp, lads. Whatever comes up, we fire first. His men, a mix of Cadian veterans and raw recruits from Xerath Prime's local militia, nodded tensely. The air was heavy with dust, and their flashlights cut long shadows across the collapsed ruins. Suddenly, the ground split open before them. A swarm of scarabs burst from the earth, their claws and drills whirring. Fire, Grim roared, and lasbolts poured into the swarm. Scarabs exploded in showers of sparks, but for every one destroyed, two more emerged. Behind them rose a line of Necron warriors, their green eyes glowing in the dark. Gauss energy flared, and a guardsman was struck. His body dissolved into a green blaze, his scream silenced before it began. Grenades, now! Grim hurled a frag grenade, the blast scattering metal shards. Yet the warriors pressed forward, unfazed, their reanimation protocols activating instantly. One was shot through the head, but its body phased out, reconstructing itself within seconds. Panic rippled through Grimm's men. Hold the line for the Emperor, we don't fall back. In the command center, Thorn received the reports. Sector Gamma is under attack. Xenos on the surface. He turned to Voss. Coordinate air support. Valkyries in now. Outside, the roar of Imperial engines shook the air as Valkyrie transports lifted, their rocket pylons armed with Inferno bombs. But the Necrons were ready. Night Shrouds, their stealth craft, materialized from nothing, cloaked in distortion fields. Gauss beams lanced out, slicing through Valkyries. Several ships erupted in fireballs before releasing their payloads. On the ground, Grimm's platoon fought for survival. A destroyer floated into view, its Gauss cannon unleashing a beam that annihilated a Chimera transport in a single shot. The crew burned alive, their screams echoing across the battlefield. Grimm dove behind a rock, his heart hammering. Vox the base, we need reinforcements now. But the Vox was filled with static. The Necrons were jamming communications. Underground, Xerath initiated a new stage of the counterattack. He deployed Canoptek spiders to reinforce surface defenses. These massive, spider-like constructs unleashed more scarabs and repaired warriors in real time. At the same time, he activated a Tesseract Vault, an ancient artifact capable of channeling the energy of a Cetan shard. It pulsed, releasing waves of entropic power across the battlefield. aging Imperial weapons and armor to dust in seconds. A lemon rust battle tank's armor corroded and collapsed, its cannon exploding in a fountain of sparks. Thorn watched the chaos unfold on the holomap. Emperor's blood, what is that? He pointed to a massive structure rising from the earth in Sector Beta, a monolith. Its particle whip swept across Imperial lines, obliterating entire platoons. Deploy the stormtroopers, take that thing down. Elite squads armed with melters and plasma rifles surged forward, but the monolith's quantum shielding absorbed their fire. One stormtrooper was struck by a Gauss beam, disintegrating into ash. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Voss led an incursion below. Her squad advanced deeper into the tomb's corridors, flashlights flickering in the eternal dark. Hold formation. We need to find their power source, she shouted, but the corridors twisted like a labyrinth, and every turn hid new terrors. A pack of flayed ones emerged, their claws dripping with dried blood. Voss fired her bolt pistol, but the creatures blinked in and out of reality. One of her men was torn apart, his screams bouncing off the cold walls. Emperor, protect us, Voss whispered, hands shaking as she reloaded. Yet she refused to yield. Her squad fought on, lasguns and grenades keeping the horrors at bay, but for every Necron that fell, another reanimated. They seemed unkillable. On the surface, Grim rallied a desperate counterattack. Gathering the remnants of his platoon and a detachment of Ogrins, massive warriors with crude weapons, he bellowed, "Forward, you big bastards! Crush them!" The Ogrins charged, their Ripper guns roaring. A destroyer exploded under the barrage, but more appeared. Grim waded into melee, his power sword cleaving through a warrior's armor, but the enemy was relentless and his men began to fall. In the tomb's heart, Karnak watched the battle unfold. The living cling to hope, pathetic. Xerath, activate the secondary defenses. Release the tomb's stalkers. Gigantic, serpent-like constructs bored through the earth, their claws and Gauss weapons tearing apart Imperial lines. One tomb stalker smashed a sentinel in a single strike, its pilot screaming as the cockpit imploded. Thorn realized the critical state of the battle. We must destroy their core. All available units with me. He led a strike force himself, armed with a power fist and plasma pistol. His squad stormed an entrance, but were met by Lichguard. Their hyperphase swords carved through his men like butter. Thorn narrowly dodged a killing blow. "For Cadia," he roared, blasting a Lichguard with his plasma pistol, yet even as it fell, its body began to mend. The tension built to fever pitch. Imperial lines wavered but held, driven by faith and desperation. The Necrons, tireless, pressed forward with their plan, attrition. They could lose thousands of warriors and continue without pause, while every fallen guardsman was a permanent loss. As night fell over Xerath Prime, sandstorms howled, and the siege teetered on collapse. A final push of destroyers, monoliths, and scarabs threatened to overwhelm the Imperium's defenses. Thorn stood amidst the chaos, his voice hoarse from shouting orders. "Hold the line, for the Emperor," but in his heart a grim realization grew, they might not win this battle. Chapter 3, The Breaking Point. The dusty sky over Xerath Prime was painted red by the sun's final rays as the siege reached a critical point. The Imperial lines still held, but cracks had begun to show. The thunder of basilisk cannons echoed across the battlefield, yet their shells caused less and less damage against the Necrons' quantum shielding. Smoke and dust swirled in the air, mingling with the screams of dying guardsmen and the mechanical hum of the Necrons' relentless advance. Captain Elias Thorn stood at the center of the chaos, his uniform soaked in blood and ash, his power fist glowing with energy. He had seen war before, but this was a nightmare like no other, a foe that could not die, that rose again and again from the ruins. In the command center, Lieutenant Myra Voss struggled to coordinate the increasingly desperate reports. "Sir, we've completely lost Sector Beta. The monolith there annihilated 2 battalions. Sector Gamma reports tomb stalkers. They're tearing our tanks apart like paper." Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the fear gnawing at her. "The fleet requests permission to begin orbital bombardment, but the risk of collateral damage is high." Thorn stared at the hologram before him, red markers for Imperial units blinking out one by one. No orbital support yet. We can't risk destroying our own lines. Send in the last stormtroopers and all available Ogrins. We have to strike at their core. That's our only chance." He turned to the Vox operator. "And get the Psyker reinforcements from the Emperor's Fury. We need their powers now." Beneath the surface, in the heart of the Necron tomb, Overlord Karnak oversaw the battle with cold precision. His throne pulsed with green energy as his sensors analyzed every movement of the Imperial forces. Cryptek Xerath stood at his side, his chronometron humming as he manipulated the flow of time to grant the Necrons an advantage. "The living are stubborn," Karnak observed, his voice a low echo from an ancient grave, "but their resistance is meaningless. Activate the Cetan shard. Let them face the wrath of a god." Xerath nodded and activated a tesseract vault deep within the tomb's chambers. Inside pulsed a captive fragment of a Cetan, a star god whose power could rend reality itself. Energy from the shard began to leak, and a wave of entropic force swept across the battlefield. Above ground, Imperial weapons and armor aged prematurely, lemon rust tanks rusted apart, lasguns short-circuited, and soldiers felt their bodies sag with unnatural exhaustion. Sergeant Luca Grimm, still holding the line in Sector Gamma, noticed the effect instantly. His cybernetic arms sparked, and his lasgun refused to fire. "What in the hell is this sorcery?" he bellowed, as his platoon fought against a wave of Necron warriors. A tomb stalker erupted from the ground, its serpentine body crushing a sentinel with a single strike. Grimm hurled a crack grenade, which exploded against the stalker's armor but left only a shallow dent. "Ogrins forward," he roared, and the massive warriors charged, their Ripper guns spitting bullets. But even the Ogrins began to falter under the shard's influence, their muscles stiffening as though they had aged decades in seconds. In the command center, Thorn received the report of this new threat. "Sir, something is affecting our troops. Our weapons and equipment are failing. The Psykers say it's some kind of Xeno's sorcery." Thorn cursed and slammed his fist on the table. "Deploy the Psyker reinforcements now. If it's warp-based, they can counter it." He took command of a strike team himself, armed with his plasma pistol and power fist, leading them toward one of the tomb's primary entrances. "We hit their core directly. If we can destroy their energy source, maybe we can stop them." Deeper underground, Lieutenant Voss and her recon group pushed through claustrophobic corridors. Their flashlights cast flickering shadows across walls inscribed with glyphs pulsing green. "Eyes sharp," Voss shouted, her bolt pistol ready. Suddenly, a scraping sound echoed. The flayed ones, deranged Necrons draped in flayed flesh, crawled from vents. Their claws gleamed in the dark, their movements jerky and predatory. "Fire!" Voss cried, and her squad opened up. Las blasts and boltrons struck, but the flayed ones phased in and out, evading the shots. A guardsman was torn apart, his screams reverberating through the corridor. Voss hurled a frag grenade, the blast scattering them briefly, but more emerged. "We can't hold them back," one of her men shouted, panic in his voice. Voss gritted her teeth. "We don't retreat. For the Emperor." She led a desperate counterattack, her bolt pistol dropping a flayed one, but its body immediately began repairing itself. Her squad fought inch by inch, but the corridors seemed endless, and the enemy unyielding. Above ground, Psyker reinforcements from the Emperor's Fury arrived. A cadre of sanctioned Psykers, led by Primaris Psyker Alara Vey, disembarked from Valkyrie transports. Their eyes glowed with warp energy as they immediately began countering the shard's entropy. Alara raised her staff, and a wave of psychic force swept the battlefield, stabilizing Imperial weapons and restoring the soldiers' strength. But the cost was heavy. Several Psykers collapsed, their minds overwhelmed by the shard's power. "We can hold their influence back, but not for long," Alara cried over the Vox. Thorn led his strike team into the tomb's entrance, where they met Lichguards. Their hyperphase swords sliced through stormtrooper armor like paper. Thorn ducked a strike and fired his plasma pistol, melting a Lichguard's torso. But the foe reconstructed itself, and the fight descended into brutal melee. "Forward, we must reach the core," he bellowed, his power fist smashing a Lichguard to scrap. But with each step forward, more of his men fell, and the Necrons seemed endless. In the tomb's heart, Xerath activated further defenses. The living approached the control chamber. Initiate secondary protocols, unleash the death marks. The snipers, hidden in dimensional pockets, materialized from the shadows and began firing upon the Imperial troops. Their synaptic disintegrators felled guardsmen with surgical precision, spreading panic. Thorn felt a shot graze his head and dove for cover. Snipers, stay low. On the surface, Grim organized a final defensive line. His platoon had been reduced to a handful, but he refused to yield. Ogryns, form a wall, hold them back. The Ogryns locked together as a living barricade, their massive bodies absorbing Gauss fire while unleashing their weapons. A tomb stalker attacked, but one Ogryn hurled himself upon it, his Ripper gun tearing holes in its carapace. The stalker fell, but another wave of warriors surged forward. From his throne, Karnak studied the resistance. They are stubborn, but their resources are finite. Increase the pressure, activate all monoliths. More of the pyramid-shaped constructs rose from the ground, their particle whips lashing the battlefield. An entire guardsman battalion was annihilated in a green flash, and Imperial morale began to collapse. Soldiers fled, their screams drowned by the detonations. Thorn pressed deeper into the tomb, his squad decimated. He reached a massive chamber where a pulsing energy core, the heart of the tomb, stood surrounded by canoptech spiders. "There it is, set the charges," he shouted, but before they could act, a unit of deathmarks materialized and opened fire. Thorn dove for cover as his men were cut down one by one. He fired his plasma pistol, dropping one deathmark, but more appeared. Voss, deeper in the labyrinth, had reached a secondary chamber. Her squad was down to 5, pursued relentlessly by flayed ones. She discovered a console covered in glyphs and tried to sabotage it. "If we can disrupt their systems," before she could finish, a flayed one attacked. She fired, but its claws tore open her arm. Blood dripped to the floor as she fell to her knees, but her resolve kept her alive. On the surface, Alara led one final psychic assault against the Cetan shard. Channeling all her strength, she unleashed a warp storm that momentarily disrupted the Necrons' reanimation protocols. But the shard struck back, and Alara collapsed, blood streaming from her eyes. "We cannot hold them," she whispered before dying. The tension reached its peak. The Imperial lines were on the verge of breaking, but Thorn refused to surrender. He hurled a demolition charge at the energy core, only for a canoptech spider to snatch it from the air and crush it. The Necrons advanced, and the siege teetered on the brink of collapse. Chapter 4, The Echo of Victory, the Red Dusk, over Xerath Prime reeked of death and ruin. The Imperial lines had held for days, but now they were on the verge of collapse under the relentless advance of the Necrons. The battlefield was chaos, burning wrecks, torn bodies, and the ceaseless humming of Gauss weaponry. The basilisk cannons, once thundering with indomitable power, now stood silent, their crews either dead or fleeing. Lemon rust battle tanks lay as rusting husks, destroyed by the entropic power of the Cetan shard or the particle whips of monoliths. Captain Elias Thorn, bloodied and exhausted, stood amidst the inferno, his power fist glowing from overheated energy. His voice, hoarse from days of shouting orders, echoed across the Vox. "Hold the line, for the Emperor we do not yield." But hope was about to be extinguished. In the command center, Lieutenant Myra Voss fought to maintain some semblance of order. Her arm was wrapped in a bloody bandage, the result of her encounter with flayed ones in the tomb corridors. "Sir, we've lost 70% of our ground forces. Sector Gamma is gone, and Sector Alpha reports massive casualties. The fleet is requesting authorization to initiate orbital bombardment. It's our last resort." Her voice trembled, but she stood firm, driven by duty. Thorn stared at the hologram before him, where red markers for Imperial units blinked out at an alarming pace. He knew orbital bombardment could annihilate the Necrons, but also his own troops and the planet's infrastructure. "Not yet," he growled. "We have one chance left. We must destroy their energy source. Send in all remaining stormtroopers and psychers. I'll lead the assault myself." Beneath the surface, in the heart of the Necron tomb, Overlord Karnak sat upon his throne, his senses glowing with triumph. Cryptek Xerath stood at his side, his chronometron pulsing as he fine-tuned the flow of time to maximize Necron efficiency. "The living are at their breaking point," Xerath reported. "Their resistance is pathetic. The Citan Shard has destabilized their weapons and morale. Recommend full offensive, activate all monoliths and tomb stalkers. We crush them now." Karnak raised a hand, his voice like thunder from an ancient grave. "So be it. Unleash our full power. Let none live to bear witness to their failure." His order rippled through the tomb network, and thousands of Necron warriors, immortals, and destroyers mobilized. Monoliths rose from the ground like dark gods, their particle whips scything across the battlefield, annihilating everything in their path. Tomb stalkers burrowed through the earth, their serpentine bodies smashing the Imperium's last tanks. On the surface, Sergeant Luca Grimm fought for his life. His platoon was reduced to a handful of guardsmen and a single Ogryn, whose massive body was riddled with Gauss burns. "Stand your ground, you worthless dogs," Grimm roared, his cybernetic arm whirring as he swung his power sword against a Necron warrior. The blade cleaved through metal, but the enemy reassembled within seconds. A tomb stalker erupted from the ground, its claws ripping apart a chimera transport as though it were paper. Grimm hurled his last crack grenade, but the explosion only dented the beast's armor. "Vox to base," he shouted, but the line was dead. The Necrons had jammed all communications. Underground, Thorn led his strike team through claustrophobic corridors, their flashlights flickering in the dark. The walls were etched with glyphs pulsing with green energy, and the air was thick with unnatural cold. His squad consisted of stormtroopers, a few Ogryns, and Primaris Psyker Kael Draven, a recent reinforcement from the fleet. Draven's eyes glowed with warp energy, his mind straining against the influence of the Citan Shard. "The core is near," he whispered, voice taut with strain, "but their power, it's overwhelming. I cannot hold back the Shard much longer." Thorn nodded, plasma pistol ready. "We have no time to waste. Forward." They advanced, only to be met by a wall of Lich Guards, their dispersion shields absorbing every shot. A stormtrooper was cleaved in half by a hyperphase sword, blood spraying the walls. Thorn charged, his power fist crushing a Lich Guard into scrap, but the foe began to reassemble. "Charges now," he roared. A stormtrooper planted a melter bomb, but a Canoptech spider lunged forward and crushed it before detonation. Meanwhile, Voss fought in another section of the labyrinth. Her group had reached a secondary control chamber, where a console pulsed with energy. "If we can sabotage their systems," she began, but a pack of flayed ones struck from the shadows. Their claws tore through her last men, leaving her alone, bolt pistol firing desperately. She downed one flayed one with a headshot, but more closed in. Diving behind the console, her heart pounded as she slammed glyphs in desperation. A spark of hope flared, the console flickered, lights dimming, but the flayed ones descended upon her, and she screamed as claws tore into her armor. On the surface, the Necrons unleashed their final offensive. Mori monoliths rose, their portals disgorging endless warriors and immortals. Destroyers hovered overhead, their Gauss cannons erasing entire platoons. A group of Ogryns made one last heroic stand, their Ripper guns felling dozens of warriors, but the Shard's entropic power aged them into dust. Grimm, now alone, stood atop a mound of corpses, his power sword raised. "Come on then, you damned machines," he roared. A destroyer drifted toward him. He lunged, cleaving through its platform, but a Gauss beam struck his chest. He collapsed, his final breath a defiant cry. For Cadia, in the tomb's heart, Xerath activated a final defense, a tesseract vault, fully charged with the Shard's power. A wave of reality-warping energy swept across the battlefield, and the Imperium's last lines collapsed. Lemon rust tanks exploded, guardsmen aged into dust, even Valkyrie aircraft fell from the sky as their engines failed. Karnak rose from his throne, sensors blazing with triumph. "The living are broken, their pathetic resistance is ended. Prepare the planet for full activation." Thorn, deep in the tomb, watched his last hope gutter out. His squad was down to 3 men, including Draven. The core, A massive, pulsing orb of green energy loomed before them, guarded by canoptech spiders and lich guards. Draven unleashed one final psychic storm, his mind aflame with warp fire. The chamber was consumed in a torrent of destruction, shattering several spiders, but the shards struck back. Draven screamed as his body disintegrated, his last words a warning. "The core, destroy it." Thorn lunged forward, plasma pistol blazing against the core. One hit, an explosion, but the quantum shielding absorbed most of it. A lich guard struck, Thorn ducked, his power fist shattering its shield. Alone now surrounded, he hurled his last melter bomb. The explosion rocked the chamber, but when the smoke cleared, the core still pulsed, stronger than ever. Above ground, the last Imperial forces fell back. The fleet, cut off from ground contact, launched a desperate orbital bombardment. Plasma beams rained from the skies, but Necron quantum shielding absorbed the majority. Monoliths teleported legions into fresh positions. Tomb stalkers crushed the last strongholds. Voss, her final act, managed to disrupt a portion of the network before the flayed ones overwhelmed her. With her dying breath, she triggered an emergency beacon to the fleet. Xerath Prime is lost. Evacuate. Karnak stood upon the battlefield, surrounded by his legions. The Imperial bases lay in ruins, their soldiers dead or fleeing. The tomb world was fully awakened, and the Necrons marched forth, eyes burning in the dark. "This is only the beginning," Karnak declared. "The galaxy shall kneel before us." His legions prepared the planet for the next stage, a springboard to awaken other tomb worlds. Trapped in the chamber, Thorn fell at last. A lich guard's blade pierced his body, and he sank to his knees, his final thought a prayer to the Emperor. The Imperial fleet retreated, abandoning Xerath Prime to the Necrons. The echo of victory resounded through the tomb's corridors, as Karnak's designs reached far beyond this world, toward the stars. Epilogue, Victory of Eternity. Xerath Prime lay in ruins. The cities, the bases, the proud regiments, all had been crushed beneath the relentless march of the Necrons. The sky still burned from the fleet's last desperate bombardment, but nothing could halt the cold machine logic that guided the lords of the tomb world. Overlord Karnak gazed out across his reclaimed dominion, his eyes ablaze with the green light of eternal energy. At his side drifted Cryptek Zorath, whose manipulations of time and machine had secured the triumph. The legions stood in perfect formations, silent as statues, yet ready to march toward their next conquest. The Imperial fleet had withdrawn, broken yet still alive. Their reports would warn other worlds, other systems, but the warning came too late. Xerath Prime was lost, and the awakening of the Necrons was no longer an isolated event. The first battle was won. A new dawn spread across the galaxy, not of light, but of the chill of metal. And in the shadows of the stars echoed Karnak's vow, "We are eternal, we are immortal, the galaxy shall be ours once more."